Based on Ing Wen Tsai's UOL student file stored in the UOL archives, the email sent from the Research Degree Examinations Office at UOL on July 19, 2011, provides key facts about Ing Wen Tsai's 1984 PhD. The green, record form, and the reproductions of thesis form, usually sent with the hardbound copies to the Senate House Library, were still in Tsai's UOL student file. They are the crucial evidence proves that the Senate House never received Tsai's final hardbound copies after the PhD exam to trigger the Viva result notification letter. It is consistent with the Information Commissioner's finding on September 3, 2021. Tsai's Viva result notification letter had not been retained in Tsai's UOL student file because it was never triggered. Tsai's UOL student file had the green, record form, and the reproductions of thesis form, but no Viva result notification letter to confirm the PhD award. It indicates that Tsai's PhD was awarded on March 14, 1984, 5 months after the PhD exam was held in October 1983, with no final hardbound copies and no Viva result notification letter to confirm the award of a PhD degree. The existence of Tsai's UOL student file in the UOL archives proves that UOL always knows it. UOL knew it before and after the PhD degree was awarded to Tsai in 1984. UOL also knew it when Tsai's non-existing doctoral thesis was investigated in 2011, 2015, and 2019. UOL's old explanation blaming the librarians for losing or misshelving Tsai's doctoral thesis was not an inadvertent mistake. It is more so if the Senate House Library's old card catalog and the IALS Library's record of the class marks are taken into consideration. However, UOL was not admonished by the first-tier tribunal judge Hazel Oliver, Alison Lowton and Ann Schaefer for its misrepresentation. 3 judges even decided the case in favor of UOL. After the old explanation was rejected by the first-tier tribunal, UOL came up with a new explanation. This time around, UOL blamed the examiners for not returning the examination copies. UOL's new explanation was supported by Tsai's UOL student file. Unfathomably, the Research Degree Examinations Office chased the examiners and Tsai's supervisor for the return of the examination copies, instead of chasing Tsai for the final hardbound copies, and the chase lasted for 1.5 years. On June 11, 2019, when Marcus Cerny learned that UOL had chased the examination copies, not the final hardbound copies, his immediate reaction was, examiners' copies were sporadically returned to institutions post-Viva and were probably simply left in an office, either centrally or in the department, unless specifically requested. I would not have expected examiner copies used in the Viva to be lodged in a library or retained formally at LSE. Furthermore, the chase for the examination copies began not before but after the award was issued, and UOL gave up the chase when no written entry clarified whether or not the examination copies had ever been received back. The email dated July 19, 2011, the findings of the Information Commissioner and the First-Tier Tribunal and UOL's admissions provide the necessary information to establish the UOL's procedure of awarding the PhD degree to Tsai in 1984. To view the records in light most favorable to UOL and Tsai, we assume the Senate House confirmed that Tsai's thesis had been passed by the examiners after the Viva exam. The Senate House received no final hardbound copies of Tsai's examined doctoral thesis in 1984, and the Viva result notification letter issued on February 8, 1984, was not retained in Tsai's UOL student file. The email dated July 19, 2011, stated that Tsai was awarded the PhD in February 1984, and the chase began after the award was issued. Since no Viva result notification letter was issued on February 8, 1984, to confirm the PhD award, in Condition 1, we assume the chase for the examination copies began on March 14, 1984 when the PhD diploma was issued. Condition 1. After the PhD exam was held in mid-October 1983, the Senate House confirmed that Tsai's thesis had been passed by the examiners. The Senate House then waited for 5 months doing nothing. On March 14, 1984, the Senate House issued a PhD diploma to Tsai, even though no final hardbound copies were received, and the Viva result notification letter was not triggered to confirm the PhD award. After the diploma was issued on March 14, 1984, the Research Degree Examinations Office began chasing the examination copies for 1.5 years and then gave up in August 1985. The email dated July 19, 2011, stated that Tsai was awarded in February 1984. On September 4, 2019, Tsai's office disclosed a copy of Tsai's Viva result notification letter dated February 8, 1984, on Facebook. In Condition 2, we assume the Senate House issued the Viva result notification letter on February 8, 1984, even though no final hardbound copies were received, and the chase began when the Viva result notification letter was issued on February 8, 1984. Condition 2. After the PhD exam was held in mid-October 1983, the Senate House confirmed that Tsai's thesis had been passed by the examiners. On February 8, 1984, the Senate House issued the Viva result notification letter even though no final hardbound copies were received. After the Viva result notification letter was issued, the Research Degree Examinations Office began chasing the examination copies. After chasing the examination copies for 1 month but to no avail, on March 14, 1984, the Senate House issued a PhD diploma to Tsai even though no final hardbound copies were received. After the PhD diploma was issued to Tsai on March 14, 1984, the Research Degree Examinations Office continued chasing the examination copies for 17 months and then gave up in July 1985. The email dated July 19, 2011, also indicated that the chase for the examination copies began after the award was issued. So, Condition 3 is similar to Condition 2, except that the chase began when Tsai's PhD diploma was issued on March 14, 1984. Condition 3. After the PhD exam was held in mid-October 1983, the Senate House confirmed that Tsai's thesis had been passed by the examiners. On February 8, 1984, the Senate House issued the Viva result notification letter even though no final hardbound copies were received. After the Viva result notification letter was issued, the Senate House waited for 1 month doing nothing and then issued a PhD diploma to Tsai on March 14, 1984, even though no final hardbound copies were received. After the PhD diploma was issued to Tsai on March 14, 1984, the Research Degree Examinations Office began chasing the examination copies for 1.5 years and then gave up in August 1985. The story does not stop there. After Tsai's PhD diploma was issued on March 14, 1984, UOL issued at least 4 letters of certification to confirm Tsai's 1984 PhD and reissued Tsai's PhD diploma at least twice, once in 2010 and once in 2015. The first letter of certification was disclosed by the Ministry of Education on January 8, 2020. The Free Chinese Centre in the UK was the predecessor of the Taipei Representative Office in the UK. In response to the degree verification request of the Ministry of Education for Tsai's teaching position at the National Chengchi University in Taipei, the Free Chinese Centre in the UK contacted UOL. On July 5, 1984, 1 A.M. Amos at UOL Central Registry Academic Division issued a letter confirming Tsai's 1984 PhD degree on July 5, 1984. 1 P.C. Kennedy, also at the Central Registry Academic Division, signed the letter for Amos. Amos's letter was issued on July 5, 1984, less than 4 months after Tsai's PhD diploma was issued on March 14, 1984. To confirm Tsai's 1984 PhD, Tsai's UOL student file must be retrieved from the UOL archives. In the file, Amos and/or Kennedy could find the green record form and the reproductions of thesis form but no copy of the Viva result notification letter, indicating that Tsai's PhD degree was awarded without final hardbound copies of Tsai's examined doctoral thesis to be deposited in the Senate House Library. The file also indicated that the Research Degree Examinations Office was in pursuit of the examination copies of Tsai's doctoral thesis. It is hard to imagine that Amos and/or Kennedy disregarded all those records and issued the letter of certification on July 5, 1984. Furthermore, the content of Amos's letter indicates that the letter was authored by Amos or Kennedy or someone else who was ignorant about UOL's regulations and LSE PhD programs. The letter stated that Tsai was an internal student of the London School of Economics and Political Science. It was inconsistent with the LSE calendars in the early 1980s. Students of the school who are reading for degrees or diplomas of the UOL are registered by the school as internal students of the university, not internal students of LSE. The second letter of certification was submitted by Tsai's attorneys to the Taiwan Taipei Prosecutor's Office on March 10, 2020, as Tsai's Exhibit 43. 3 years after Tsai had been teaching at Chengchi University, the authenticity of her PhD degree needed to be verified again. On September 23, 1987, the Free Chinese Centre in the UK sent another degree verification request to the academic registrar at UOL. The academic registrar never responded. Instead, P.C. Kennedy, who signed Amos's letter in July 1984, sent a letter to the Free Chinese Centre in the UK confirming Tsai's 1984 PhD on September 30, 1987. The letter was issued 2 years after the Senate House gave up the chase for the examination copies in July or August 1985. When Tsai's UOL student file was retrieved from the UOL archives, the records of 1.5 years of futile chase for the examination copies and a copy of Amos' letter of certification signed by Kennedy had been added in Tsai's UOL student file. The content of Kennedy's letter once again shows that the author of the letter was ignorant about UOL's regulations and LSE PhD programs. It certified that the minimum period of study for the PhD degree was 2 calendar years. It was inconsistent with the 1983–1984 UOL regulations. The minimum period of study for the PhD degree in the early 1980s was 2 academic years, not 2 calendar years. Kennedy's letter also raises an issue of degree fraud because it certified that it was not possible to issue detailed information on Tsai's PhD since it was awarded after a course of research and the submission of a thesis title. Even a diploma mill would not certify a PhD awarded after submitting a thesis title. The third letter of certification was subpoenaed from Suzhou University in Taipei on September 10, 2019. On April 9, 1990, G. F. Roberts, academic registrar at UOL, issued the letter to certify Tsai's 1984 PhD degree. At the time, Tsai was applying for being promoted from associate professor to professor at Chengchi University. It was issued 6 years after UOL awarded the PhD to Tsai, 5 years after the Senate House gave up the chase for the examination copies of Tsai's doctoral thesis in July or August 1985. When Tsai's UOL student file was retrieved from the UOL archives, a copy of Kennedy's letter of certification had been added in Tsai's UOL student file. As the academic registrar, Roberts knew better than anyone else. The Viva result notification letter usually issued by herself was not triggered by submission of the final hardbound copies. Kennedy issued a letter of certification on her behalf, which certified that Tsai's 1984 PhD was awarded after the submission of a thesis title. Tsai's 1984 PhD was awarded with no final hardbound copies to be deposited in the Senate House Library, and the examination copies had all vanished after the PhD exam. It is hard to believe that Roberts issued the letter of certification instead of undertaking remedial actions. In 2010, Tsai ran for the new Taipei city mayor. Her PhD diploma was required by the Civil Servants Election and Recall Act to verify her PhD from LSE. Tsai applied, and UOL reissued Tsai's PhD diploma when Tsai's UOL student file had all those records plus a copy of Roberts' letter of certification issued on April 9, 1990. In 2015, UOL reissued Tsai's PhD diploma for the second time. According to Tsai, she applied the reissued diploma because suspicions on the authenticity of her PhD was raised maliciously. At the time, a record of Tsai's PhD diploma reissued 5 years ago in 2010 had been added in Tsai's UOL student file. A letter of certification was issued together with the reissued PhD diploma. It was issued by Craig O'Callaghan, Chief Operation Officer at UOL, on September 22, 2015. It bears no O'Callaghan's embossed seal, rendering the letter of certification non-official. When O'Callaghan's letter of certification and Tsai's PhD diploma were reissued in 2015, it had been over 3 decades since UOL awarded Tsai a PhD in 1984. 3 letters of certification had been issued and 1 PhD diploma had been reissued. For awarding a PhD to Tsai without the final hardbound copies of Tsai's examined doctoral thesis, UOL blamed the librarians and the examiners, but not Tsai, the PhD candidate then and the President of the Republic of China now. UOL chased Tsai's supervisor and examiners for the examination copies for 1.5 years, but no records show that UOL had ever contacted Tsai for the long overdue final hardbound copies after the PhD was awarded, and before 4 letters of certification were issued, and 2 diplomas were reissued. In 2015, UOL investigated Tsai's non-existing doctoral thesis again, resulting in the email dated June 29, 2015, at 15:13. The new development was that the internal examiner left his copy of the PhD thesis with the supervisor, Michael Elliott, post viva. Elliott left both copies with the LSE, asking the LSE to return these to the Senate House. These were never received. On June 24, 2019, Clive Wilson discovered that Elliott was away from LSE in the last year of Tsai's PhD and subsequently left LSE in 1984 to join The Economist. Tsai's registration ended in June 1982. Elliott was not assigned as Tsai's supervisor after June 1982. In other words, after June 1982, Tsai was not registered and Elliott was not assigned to supervise Tsai. Elliott was president and chief executive officer of One Campaign from 2011 to 2016. An article, originally published in The Times on July 22, 2016, can be found on the website of One Campaign. According to this article, Elliott lectured at LSE and then went on to work in the Central Policy Review staff in the UK Cabinet Office as an advisor to the former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher until she disbanded the unit after the 1983 general election. The 1983 United Kingdom general election was held on June 9, 1983. It indicates that Elliott had been away from LSE long before June 9, 1983. Elliott then had an opportunity to work for the big management consultancy firm Deloitte. But after he met Andrew Knight, the editor of The Economists at the time, Elliott joined The Economists. The Economist responded to an inquiry on April 4, 2022, confirming that Elliott joined The Economist approximately in February 1984. Instead of checking Elliott's personnel file to be sure when Elliott left LSE and whether or not he was Tsai's thesis supervisor after he left LSE, LSE argued that it was not unusual for supervisors to continue overseeing students even if they moved to different institutions. According to LSE's argument, Elliott continued overseeing Tsai for almost 2 years when both of them were no longer affiliated with LSE after June 1982. UOL permitted Tsai to submit the doctoral thesis in June 1983 and sit the Viva exam in mid-October 1983 while Tsai was not registered. When Elliott was away from LSE long before the UK general election held on June 9, 1983, and not assigned as Tsai's supervisor, the internal examiner left his copy with Elliott after Tsai's Viva exam, and Elliott left both copies with LSE. After the award was issued, the Senate House began chasing Elliott for the return of the examination copies and gave up the futile chase after 1.5 years. The chase began right around the time when Elliot started working at The Economist. At the time, The Economist was based in St. James's at the iconic building informally known among the company as the Tower. The address was 25 St. James's Street in London. According to Google Maps, it was a 27-minute walk from the Senate House at Mallet Street. It took 1.5 years for the Research Degree Examination Office to chase Elliot, who was a 27-minute walk away, for the return of the examination copies but eventually failed.